Babe, 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 we got a podcast to do. You with me on this? Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And babe, just don't call people babe and you might be okay. I think that's the theme of the movie here. Don't call your wife babe and things might work out better for you. But hey, babe, the good news is we have a great panel for you today for our Q&A of Windfall. We have co-writers Justin Lader and Andrew Kevin Walker, along with director Charlie McDowell. And so, Justin and Charlie have been in the podcast in the past. And this time, Andrew Kevin Walker joined the team as their co-writer, which is cool because now it's a great triumvirate that we have for you today. And I can't say enough good things about Windfall. It's exactly what you kind of want to see streamers like Netflix do, because it's got kind of a noir aspect. It's got an independent film aspect, but it's intelligent and it's different from a lot of the other content we see. And if you have not yet seen Windfall, please go to Netflix and check it out, because there's just really good writing, acting, directing. Everything is really firing on all cylinders here. And I was quite excited to assemble this amazing panel, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, let's take a moment to hear from today's sponsors, Coverfly.com and FinalDraft.com. If you're a screenwriter looking to get your work out there, you'll love Coverfly.com because they curate some of the best talent discovery programs all in one place. At Coverfly.com, you could submit your screenplays to writing fellowships, labs, competitions, and festivals, and then track the status of your submission through the Coverfly Writers Dashboard. Of course, Coverfly is also a great resource to connect screenplays and writers to industry professionals. To date, hundreds of screenwriters have met their agents or managers at Coverfly.com, and these writers have gone on to work with Hollywood companies like Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So if you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished screenplay, check out Coverfly.com to learn more. Of course, you got to write that screenplay first, and that's why having the world's premier and award-winning screenwriting program, Final Draft, would be a great place for you to start over at FinalDraft.com. In Final Draft 12, which is the current version, they've added a collaborate feature, allowing writers to write together simultaneously at the same time in the same document without being in the same place. There's a lot of great new features in the software that you could find at FinalDraft.com, but also, if you're looking to upgrade or purchase the software, I have a coupon code for you that you're going to love, because it is 40% off. At FinalDraft.com in your shopping cart, right when you're ready to purchase, use coupon code QAPOD22. That's QAPOD22, and that will save you 40% off your purchase of Final Draft 12 software or an upgrade. So thanks again to today's sponsors, Coverfly.com and FinalDraft.com. Of course, when you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. Folks, we are 10 years old this June, and we are preparing as cool of an issue as we can. And there's a lot of good stuff now in our Oscar issue, and we've even continued adding stories to it after we published that are not Oscar stories, because we could do that. We're a digital magazine. So if you've never read us before, I hope you'll check out the iPad app Backstory, or just read us on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net. And you could test drive us by reading our free issue, which shows you what we're all about. And if you want to become a subscriber, and I really hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners at iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these interviews go because they started as Zooms. You could see them over there. It would really mean a lot to me to have your support as subscribers to Backstory Magazine. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with co-writers Justin Lader and Andrew Kevin Walker, along with director Charlie McDowell, about their latest film, Windfall. We're going to kind of go back a little. I love to give people a baseline for each of you before we start. And of course, smart podcast listeners would have listened to the Discovery podcast, but it's been a few years. So Justin, no pressure on you, just starting with you. Did you always want to be a screenwriter? And what led you down this path? And did you study it? Did you go to film school?
I did. I went to a film school in Orlando called the University of Central Florida. At the time, their claim to fame was the Blair Witch Guys came out of there. So it was very guerrilla style filmmaking. You wrote, you directed, you edited. Unfortunately, you acted in all of your short films. And then I ended up applying to AFI when I knew I was going to move out to LA to really try to, throw my hat in the ring. And AFI is the polar opposite. It's very regimented. And when I was deciding between directing and screenwriting, I realized my joy and my passion really came from breaking stories and writing stories, and I loved being on set and I loved all that kind of stuff, but I did not like all the work that it takes to actually direct and put something together, and the idea of like doing another 2 years where I have to like bust my ass to make a short film. I was like, I'd rather just write a feature script. And so yeah, that's why I chose screenwriting, which was the best, because then it led me to Charlie, who is good at all of those things. So it was the right decision.
Did you and Charlie meet at AFI?
He had already graduated.
Right.
My thesis script producer gave to him. He was long gone by the time I got there, and he read that script and liked it, and that's how he and I started out collaborating.
Long gone. So much older.
I know, way older.
What's the nine?
I'm actually older.
I know. How did that work?
You're the esteemed gentleman. Charlie, obviously you come from a showbiz family. I'm a big fan of the film your parents met on, Time After Time.
Yeah.
Long time fan of that film. Really rocks. I'm curious what led you toward directing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, my childhood was kind of I grew up on a set, and that was like parents' workplace. And so I wasn't interested in it. I didn't want to be a part of it. I found it to be really boring. And so I wanted to explore other things, and I was obsessed with surfing, and I wanted to be a pro surfer, something completely different. And then I think I realized at some point in high school that I had some sort of visual eye. I shot a little student film or something for a film class, and I realized, I can understand how to piece together a narrative, and it became something that I was like, now I want to tell a different kind of story, and I want to like collaborate with an actor, and so I started to get into it at the end of high school, and then I ended up going to Chapman University for film. And then after Chapman, I went to AFI for directing. And AFI was really, for me, where I sort of learned the craft, or as much as you can learn and understand the craft of directing. Before, I was just sort of exploring ideas, but I didn't really understand how to put something together. I wasn't shooting coverage. I was just shooting scenes, and so I really got to explore and play at AFI and be challenged by other people. I think that's a part of film school, is you're not in a competitive way, but in a way of like, okay, well, these people are doing this. They're inching closer. They're telling more interesting stories. They're learning from their past experiences. And so that makes you do the same thing, and at a certain point, it clicked for me. Like, telling stories through images was something that I never wanted to turn off. I always wanted to continue to explore.
Andrew, your starts, your road down the writing path.
I was always interested in movies from a very young age. I, as many in my family, 3 brothers and 1 sister, a lot of us, and my parents went to Penn State. I'm from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. So I'm about as far away from like, USC or UCLA, or even, in experience, like NYU film school, etc. Went to Penn State. They did have a great film program. I was probably like Justin, going, I'm going to be a director. And then just realized writing was where it was at for me. There happened to be an incredible screenwriting teacher at Penn State at the time, Jeff Rush, and this was like mid 80s. And kind of like what Justin's saying, like luckily, there's only so much you can learn from student films and very short content. I mean, it becomes kind of like crafting a good joke when it comes to short films or student films to a certain extent. At least that's the most that I can muster. And I happened to be able to write a feature-length script when I was at Penn State, like probably junior year. So I really focused on screenwriting, and then I moved to New York immediately out of school with 3 friends of mine and pursued what seemed like a kind of a pipe dream, trying to work in the film industry. But as I have said many times in the past, it's better to know exactly what you want to do, no matter how impossible it seems to get to do it, than to just be kind of floundering around and trying to find, something to do that might be more within your grasp. But, I just consider myself, for all the misery of screenwriting, I consider myself very lucky to have been able to wallow in that misery so many years.
Sure. Well, before we get to Windfall, which we're going to get to soon, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Seven.
Why do we have to talk about that?
And it's interesting because it was not your first script. Your first produced credit was for Tales of the Crypt, and then you'd had another feature 2 after that.
That's let's talk Brain Scan all day long. That's
Brain Scan as well. I'll just tell you a kind of amusing story, just because I'm one of the olds. I was interning. I went to USC for theater and film, and I was interning just around town. I'd done Silver Pictures and some Scott Rudin stuff as well. And all the assistants and everybody in development started talking about this one script, and it was Seven. And everybody was talking about how brilliant it was, and nobody knew what to do with it, because at that time, the lines that Seven crossed overall had not been crossed in mainstream movies by a studio, no less. And so nobody knew what was going to happen. And we were tracking it in the early days before the internet really existed beyond using it for email.
Right.
And it landed at this company called...
It ended up at Pentamerica.
Pentamerica. Thank you. That's what I was trying to say. Pentamerica.
Go ahead.
And
sorry.
they made The Two Jakes and some other movies.
They made a lot of... I think they made Pentamerica were great, and they were really terrific people, the ones that I dealt with. But they did make some interesting choices. They made like the senility comedy Folks, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Danson is in. I'm not sure if I'm right about that. I can look it up.
They made a lot of bad movies.
Don't let me interrupt you. But yes, when they had Seven ... they soon kind of went semi-bankrupt, I should say.
So here's the point of my story, in which it was kind of like this dream script in which it wasn't clear if anybody was going to make it. And we all realized as Pentamerica was sliding that there was a chance to make it. And nobody knew what to do because, we're all like little assistants, readers, whatever. And I just got this idea that what if we could raise the money to buy Seven out of development? So I called Pentamerica. I called Pentamerica Pictures as a film student, basically, and got their development person on the phone, which took about a month. And then we tried to independently raise what was between $100,000 to $150,000 to buy Seven out of development from Pentamerica, and we got as far as 75. I swear to God. And
oh my God.
We tried. We were trying to do it, and we're like, well, hey, what if we just write you into this contract that if we get the rest of it, like, you'll get these points on the back end? And they're like, you're a kid. We're not taking points from a kid. And like, there was like literally 5 minutes where there was a group of us that almost could have at least produced Seven. We weren't sure what we were going to do beyond the idea of getting it.
First of all, I want to correct, and it was a long time ago. So yeah, Ted Danson is not in Folks.
Okay.
Good to know. Really interesting movie stuff. Here's the thing: you feel that they were on the verge of selling it to you?
They weren't on the verge, but they said if I had the cash.
I'm trying to picture what it would have been like going to the meeting where I learned that someone else has bought it. But it's kind of like it's like like GoFundMe before it existed. Like,
well, basically, yeah, because they were bleeding cash at that point and trying to stay in business. So they knew that it would be a good sale.
And that's where Gianni Nunari, who I adore, his relationship with Arnold Kopelson came in, and that's how Kopelson came into the picture.
Right.
And that's how Fincher came into the picture. And we can go into as much or as little detail as you want about the fact that Fincher I had done a massive rewrite for Jeremiah Chechik, who had been attached in the Pentamerica years. And I ruined my own script, in my opinion. I mean, it was like basically my second job professionally, because I did a thing called Lie to Me, this book for Silver Pictures. Then I did 7, rewrote it for the director. The director is God, what he says goes. I rewrote the whole thing. So it was a completely different ending. There was an ending in a burnt out church with 7 panels of like 7 deadly sins in the church. Everything changed. And if I hadn't done that, and I don't do that these days, I usually, if I feel like I'm not really improving something, no harm, no foul, I'll leave and let them go and have someone else, in my opinion, ruin it, maybe, or maybe not. But anyway, the point is, long story, a little bit longer. They meant to send Fincher my draft that I had rewritten for Jeremiah Chechik, but they accidentally sent him the first draft. So when he talked to them, it was probably over the phone. Interesting. He was kind of interested, and he talked about the ending. Then they said, oh, no, we sent you the wrong draft.
That's funny. And I remember that draft as being one of the other reasons why we felt we had to bond together to save the integrity of what 7 was. Because
luckily, instead of you guys having to do it, kind of a fraternity house of lunatics.
Yes. No fraternity.
David Fincher came to my rescue instead.
Yes, and I'm glad he did. And
I'm not actually claiming you were in a fraternity.
But I would love to one day talk about 7 longer, but we're gonna get to Windfall. But before we do, Charlie and Justin, your last film, The Discovery, pre-pandemic, we did this as a screening. I saw it premiere at Sundance. We did a Q&A podcast in front of a live crowd. Here we are years later. We're weeks away from over 1 million people being, deceased from COVID. And we're in this kind of grieving phase as a nation. And The Discovery has so much about death and grieving in it, and this willing and wanting for a second chance. And I'm just curious how you look back on it now in the eyes from the pandemic, as the world has certainly changed. And if there were any lessons that you learned from The Discovery as you moved forward creatively on Windfall that stayed with you. So Justin, starting with you.
As far as the theme of The Discovery and second chances, I've never really thought about it like that, in relation to COVID. The only time The Discovery crossed my mind in relation to COVID was very cynically realizing what Charlie and I got wrong with The Discovery, which was the idea that even in the face of irrefutable proof, people will actually believe what science is saying. Because the conceit of The Discovery was that an afterlife is scientifically proven, and it's proven in such a way that it's irrefutable. So people just believed it, and as a result, they try to get there by ending their lives prematurely. We now know with COVID that a disease could come out that could virtually, kill you, and your biggest complaint for some people is they're making me wear a mask at Disney. So that's sort of what I thought about the most, which is, and even when you watch a movie like Contagion, it's like that movie also didn't account for the fact that people are just upset that they oh my god, they I can't get to the mall, not how am I going to survive. Right. So that the aspect of human behavior with respect to science, that's the sort of area that I keep going back to with The Discovery.
Yes, the dead Kennedys said it best: give me convenience or give me death.
Yes.
Charlie.
Yeah. I feel the same way as Justin does. I mean, for me also, I think with each project, I really have to let them go, you know? So revisiting, I mean, I think the idea is interesting to kind of look at now as our world shifts and changes. But I think once we started to come up with the idea for Windfall and what we wanted to explore, that to me connected way more so in the feeling of the pandemic than the discovery did. And so I think that, you know, for the last almost 2 years now, we've been discussing Windfall and coming up with this idea. And I think very early on, we all decided we didn't want to make a pandemic movie, you know, something that explored the pandemic, or we ever saw a Mask or something like that. But I think we made a film that captures the emotional roller coaster of the pandemic, you know, as we're sitting with these characters in a space that is considered a home for some and is supposed to feel like a safe haven. We're sitting with these characters and they're going through moments of madness, they're going through moments of being terrified, they're laughing, they're sort of going through every emotion. And to me, that always felt very true of right now, you know, and even in the last, you know, pre-pandemic, I think, you know, politically in the last, you know, whatever, 5 years, the world just feels off, you know, it just feels energetically it feels off. And I think the tone of the movie kind of took on this interesting thing that for me reflects the time, you know. It's like it isn't one thing or another, it's not black and white. You can feel crazy and happy at the same time, you know. And I think that that's the emotional roller coaster we've been on, especially our country, for quite a few years. And so I think early on we liked the idea of exploring this story with that intention or that feeling as a part of it.
You know, we're going to get straight into it now. So I know this is the most boring question ever because you've answered it a million times, but just again to set a baseline, you know, it's story by Charlie, Justin, Andrew, and Jason Segel. Tell us how the idea for Windfall began, and you know what it was in its kind of early preconceptions.
The sort of Cliff's Notes version of it is that Charlie and I had a movie that was getting ready to go. Charlie could correct me if I'm wrong, but like everything was in place. We had already cast a good, like the main roles, and it was supposed to be shot in June of 2020, and that kind of shut down. I think, you know, Andy had some stuff in the pipeline, and that was sort of a question mark.
He's shaking his head no.
I don't even have a pipeline.
There was a lot of uncertainty, and Jason, who, you know, we're all very friendly, and Jason obviously did the discovery with Charlie and I. He sort of sent a text, you know, just to, if the four of us kind of want to hop on Zoom to discuss an idea. And there was this sort of, before we got into like the nitty gritty of what the story was, there was just this sort of sentiment of, there's so much uncertainty. The election hadn't happened yet. We didn't know what was going to come of this virus. Is there a way, while, you know, not just only to distract ourselves from the state of the world, but is there a way, while obviously being scared and wanting to stay safe, is there a way that we could keep our creativity going? And is there a way that if we're smart about it, can we make something small? Can we actually make and create something in the safest way possible? And that was sort of the sentiment behind it. And I'll let Andy and Charlie chime in on more of the specifics.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I think that we may have found something else to have done, but I don't think we'd be all sitting here if not for Jason coming up with a really cool idea. And I'm just, I don't really write with other people for the most part. There's many reasons for that, but one of them is I'm very persnickety and overweening when it comes to, you know, oh, this is where a comma goes. Don't use this word, use that word, blah, blah, blah. And also I'm very fearful of all that I do not bring to any project. So like these guys know, I mean, if I'm getting paid for something, that immediately sends me into a spiral of insomnia and misery. And not to say I don't love money, but writing weighs on me very heavily, and pretender syndrome is all part of it. We all know that, blah, blah, blah.
You still have imposter syndrome issues?
Yeah, I mean, every day.
Huh. Interesting.
So,
I just did the Oscar panel, my 14th annual Oscar screenwriting nominees, and Jane Campion was talking about it. And you're thinking like, Jane Campion, really? Like this far in her career?
For writers or writer directors, it's when you're facing a blank page and literally you could put down anything. You just gotta kind of be going, well, why is what I put down more valid than anything else? But it's also just about, my motto is, and I have it on some custom pencils that I have. My motto for screenwriting is, your disappointment destroys me. And it's just a way of like kind of presupposing that I'm gonna fall short, no matter who I'm working for.
Sure.
But the other point is, like, listening to Jason talk about an idea, other people's ideas, every one of us has experienced to a certain extent throughout our lives someone who comes up to just a friend and says, hey, I have this idea, it's about a dentist who's also a spy and blah blah blah, and you say, well, that's great, go with God. And they say, will you write the outline for me? And you just go, no. in dental spy, your new spec. But it's a kismet thing. Like, is this idea that someone's presenting to you going to be something that you can get into enough to bring something to it, and also get into it enough that you'll be engaged by it? I'm not one who sees a job as a job and I'll take whatever job. I have to kind of convince myself to take a job, and I'd much rather write something for no pay, hand it in and have them say, F you, and then they get to keep all their money and I don't have to feel like I've disappointed everyone.
Interesting. Well, so since you really don't like co-writers, what made you decide to co-write this?
It was a great idea. There was a certain process of a couple of meetings at least where we started to hash out the concept. And one of the things that got discussed very briefly but pushed aside, and I really am glad for that, was that idea that it would be a pandemic story. And I think it was so early in the true lockdown that not doing it that way, I think, spoke to the hope that existed that this thing would only last a few months, and that to make a movie with everyone wearing masks, or to make a movie even that was about like, oh, there might be nuclear fallout out there, so these people are pushed into kind of a terrarium and have to coexist. That stuff got kind of discarded pretty early on. I was glad.
Well, wait. Sorry to interrupt. That was an early concept, guys?
Well, no, what I'm saying is, when we had decided, and Charlie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there really was a sense that because of this, the way that this is going to have to be made, and because of protocols, it wasn't like you were going to have a 15 location movie and going all around town and a big crew, etc. So the jar kind of aspect of it was there early on. But no, I mean, Jason's idea was pretty specific and very close to what's there now. It's just, as we batted around different ideas, or why three people were thrown together and kind of stayed together, other than the hostage aspect, we definitely discussed whether it was against the backdrop of some, even just briefly, some greater thing that was going on out there, because we were in the midst of some greater thing going on out there. And anyway, just really quickly, so we got to a point where we had done the beats of the story enough, and especially the ending, where I felt this is really interesting, and I won't be disappointing them, and they, it'll be a nice collaboration, and there was a division of labor that kind of came naturally, but we all worked equally on the story every single day on Zoom. And I will say I was kind of the club secretary, because I was like the only one who wrote stuff down, because more memories than I do. And I like to make stupid charts and put the first act here and the second act there, etc.
Wait, tell us about the charts.
I can't keep being the one who talks. The charts are simply a kind of, I mean, I'm sure the book is within reach here. Sid Field kind of, 3-act structure, know your end of your first act, know your end of your second act, know the ending, have an idea about what the midpoint is, try and learn the relationship between each of those acts. So I would just draw a little chart, and I would keep putting the story points onto it that we had discussed, and then we would share that and just kind of.
Okay.
And it's interesting because you see I do it all the time. When you see the story on one page, you have the ability to go, oh, what if you move this just right here? And we ended up doing that with a lot of stuff. And you decide, oh my God, that's what the third act is. That's what the third act is.
Justin, it was at a time where a lot of writers actually were having trouble writing. So I think it's actually pretty great that you guys were getting an escape from the pandemic by just being creative, which is, the best, healthiest way forward. But it was tough for a lot of writers that I've interviewed to write at that time with so much uncertainty. Justin, what was it like for you to kind of dive into this as a script at that time, writing in the pandemic?
For me, there was a lot of, because I'm very neurotic, and the whole thing when all this started back in March of 2020 really threw me for a loop. And I was already trying to finish. I was writing a pilot for Amazon, and I was writing the second episode of something for Hulu, and it was really hard to get going. And it was it was this really interesting thing where, going on a Zoom for like 3 or 4 days a week for 4 hours a day with like 3 of my really close friends, it felt like a vacation from the concern, and it didn't really feel like writing. And if we would just talk, and we would bullshit, we would talk about other things, like a funny anecdote, a dream we had, an embarrassing memory from high school, and then it would always you'd always find a way to kind of circle back into the story. And I don't want to make it sound like Rumpelstiltskin or something like that, but it was just all of a sudden, like, you realized, oh my God, we came up with the first act. How did that happen? Because I was just telling an embarrassing story from high school, and that, it took the pressure off. We have to be creative. We have to write. It has to be good. We're going to ignore the fact that the world's ending all around us. It was just, oh, my friends that I haven't seen, I don't know when I'm going to see them, because we don't know how long this is going to last. We're just hanging out, and we're talking about a story. And after a couple months of doing this a couple days a week, we had the shape and the outline and the structure of a movie. And what was really also good, because, the times that I've worked with Charlie, we just worked together. So to literally be on a Zoom like this, the way that I'm looking, instead of your face, it was Jason Siegel's face. It was the four of us, to sort of see Charlie in action as kind of like, which I think all really good directors are, this kind of like conductor, like creatively breaking the story, knowing when we were kind of getting too far off track to kind of steer it back in. It was just, I never even told him this, but it was just really cool to watch. He's really good at quite frankly, the part of directing that made me realize that is not necessarily for me. Not just the creative aspect, which he's really good at, but also the managing of everything, and having your fingers in everything, and knowing how to, like, okay, these are 4 friends, and things could easily go off track. How do I kind of steer it back to this? Partially because he was probably like, I don't want to be on Zoom for another 5 hours, But that element of it made it really easy to get into a creative mode, because we tricked ourselves into, this is just a hangout session, and then at the end of it, we had a movie.
Charlie, to Justin's point, it is a trick, because when you're satisfying the early part of a creative process, if you shut too many things down, just flat out ego gets in the way, or people's feelings could get hurt, or it doesn't really have the feeling of a creative environment. I keep coming back to what they say about improv comedy, right? In which you try and build on things by saying yes and, right? So you move the things forward rather than crush it. What were some of the tips and tricks of making sure that even when things were going in a way that you didn't seem viable, to let it breathe for a little, to see if something could be gleaned that might be worth putting in before moving on? Because you don't want to just poo-poo everything.
He's very good at that.
Well, a couple things. We knew what we were playing with. We had, and this is sort of to go back to our first film, the one I love, which came out of sort of necessity of, no one's going to give us money. How do we make something for basically nothing? And the idea was to set it in one location, contain it, keep it small, but elevate it with a bigger idea, and so we're starting from a place with this one of, we have a location that we know we want to shoot at. We have our sandbox, and we know all of the tools in the sandbox. And so then it's about, how do we use all those tools? How do we maximize the sandbox? And even though there are restrictions to it, how do we use those restrictions to our advantage? So we have that element, which is kind of a great starting off point, because you have these random images or ideas that then start to tie into character, start to tie into plot points, and then even start to tie into the themes that we're exploring, So when you know that this house has a sauna, that's outdoors, and then all of a sudden, I can't remember who it was, I think it was Andy, is like, okay, well, what about if then he takes them and puts them in the sauna because he's trying to contain them? It's a place that can be contained. That's probably not something we're going to come up with without this thing existing in the space, And so we had a lot of these puzzle pieces, and then it was about how do we get there? How do we go through the process of this story? And that was just the collaboration of it, And when I already knew my relationship and my working relationship with Justin and how talented he is. When we're working with our good friend Andy, but also now communicating with him in a totally different way, and that we're collaborating together, it was a whole new experience. Of course, Justin and I had total respect and awe for Andy and what he had done in the past, but then you're experiencing it in person or on Zoom, and Andy's coming up with ideas that, at least for me, I would never come up with. And then you just all start to build off of each other, and Jason is such a powerhouse of a creative mind. This guy is like, he can do comedy and drama as an actor, and then you look at his writing credits and his ability to do so many different things, and he's just such a talented person. And so I think the process of all of us together figuring out what we wanted to explore was quite easy. I mean, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it was quite fun, because it just sort of naturally started to fall into place. And then at a certain point, Jason and I were like, all right, we're out of here, guys, see you later. And and the trust of Justin and Andy to go now take these ideas and create them, make them what they actually are, and figure out who these characters really are. And then to start getting pages. It was such a special process, it was the friendship and then the creative trust from everyone was really a special thing, and something that only Justin and I had shared, which was amazing. But it's two people, and then when you have four, it becomes something more. And then we can get into it, but then that expands and starts to go into the rest of the cast once we start to put it together.
Sure.
And that becomes a whole other thing.
Well, a few quick flash of lightning questions. What was the project that fell apart?
It was this project called Gilded Rage. It was a really interesting true story about this kid. He was in his 20s that suffered from mental illness that was sort of undiagnosed, based on the fact that he grew up in this sort of Wall Street world where everyone's just like, here to fix your problems, take these pills, everything's fine,
Right.
sort of thing. And the true story is this kid ended up killing his own dad.
Yikes.
And it's a really fascinating and intense story, and it was something that we tried to really get off the ground for a couple years, and we finally got to that place where we were about to go do it, and then everything shut down.
Could it still happen?
Yeah, it could. We talk about whether we want to tell that story now, and that's the other thing that comes out of this time, this pandemic. And it's like, it's not only the pandemic, it's Black Lives Matter, it's the election, like all of these sort of
Right.
life
What story do you want to tell?
changes, and so this question of like, who are we as storytellers, and what do we want to put out there? What do we feel like should be seen, or do we want to be seen or want to tell? It's, for me, from the start to finish line, it's at least 2 years always. And most of the time it's more, so why do I want to spend all of that time and energy on a specific story, these are the questions that come up, and I think the pandemic and the last 2 years just in general, it took stories in a different path, for a
Yeah.
lot of people. I think a lot of people are examining what they want to do now. And so I think that certainly is us. And so I don't know, I have to let that one go. It's a great script. It's a really fascinating story. And yeah, again, I
Okay.
think we'll see whether
Yeah.
we want to engage with it again.
Well, it's interesting what you said about going back to the one I love for a single location and really making the most of it. I mean, obviously in this film, if they just would have gone to the house from the one I love, all their problems probably would have been solved.
Which, by the way, was a mile away. We shot The
Really?
One I Love and Windfall a mile apart from each other.
Well, you said you found this house. How did you find the house, just really briefly, and know about, like you said, the sauna, everything else, because location is important?
It was a friend's house that we knew
Okay.
wasn't living there at the time, so it was something that was okayed early on before we started the process of writing every detail of it. So we knew that we were.
It was the sandbox that we knew we could.
Yeah. What part of California is it?
It's in Ojai, California.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
it's where
Yeah.
I grew up, a different mile, a different direction away from both of the One I Love house and the Windfall house. That's where I grew up. So
Gotcha.
those mountains, that terrain, everything, that's my childhood. So
Okay.
I think the idea too of returning to that and exploring stories now as an adult in my professional life, that became really special for me just because I had
Sure.
such an attachment to that space.
Justin and Andy, talk about your process as co-writers, especially, Andy, as you're not exactly used to it. Once you had your outline going, were you sending pages back and forth, or were you using, like something like Collaborate and Final Draft, or, writing
That's
at the
what we
same
were
time
doing.
with one screen? Tell us about your writing process.
First of all, I just want to say, I mean, we obviously were proceeding with a kind of blood oath between us that the friendship was first and foremost for all of us. And that was really important. And that was important to say. It is important to say that kind of thing when you're going into something that's collaborative and contains so much creativity and kind of often disagreements. And then, I mean, really, I want to emphasize it was like this Charlie, Jason, Justin, and me, like that story from start to finish. And that's why we're so gratified that we had to tweak the credit a little bit, but the story credit is exactly accurate. And then the outline was pretty detailed. And then Justin and I marched off, which means stayed in our separate homes and got on Zoom every day. I think what I did was I had Zoom on my iPad and I had a Final Draft on my laptop, and we did Collaborate. So there was never a time, except for maybe a few brief moments, there was never really a time, and it would have been, in those instances, it would have been rewriting stuff that we had already done. There's never a time of passing stuff back and forth. Basically, we were always just watching each other type and jumping in and kind of passing it back and forth. And the thing that I think Charlie's an incredibly talented director. I think Justin is a really great screenwriter, and I do not admire many other screenwriters. There's not many that I read that I go, oh, that's a really good writer, and Justin's one of them. Not that that's some, crown on anyone's head, what my stupid freaking opinion is. But, and obviously Jason is like Charlie's already said it. I mean, he's just incredible. And we knew that, we knew what part we were writing for him, more in line with the kind of really cool dramatic stuff he's been doing the last handful of years. It was incredibly gratifying how the days when I don't feel like I was kind of like pulling my weight as much, Justin would pull me along. And then the other times, when Justin, was like, okay, you take it for a little while, I was glad to do it. The best story to tell is just, Justin and I were walking along the beach one day, and I looked behind us and I said, wait, Justin, why is there only one pair of footprints behind us? I thought we were doing this together. Andy, that's when I was carrying you, Justin. The point is, it proceeded at much more a pace. We weren't hurrying through it, and we weren't hurrying through any part of this process, but it was somewhat, there was a little bit of a deadline because we knew we have to kind of get this ready and kind of get in the window of getting it done. etc. But we still went through our film noir books, and we still watched a lot of cool stuff like The Collector and Desperate Hours, both the Humphrey Bogart and the Michael Cimino.
I was going to bring up Desperate Hours because there's a lot of Desperate Hours here.
There's a really, at least for me, not well-known movie called He Ran All the Way, which was John Garfield and Shelley Winters. You know, it was maybe slightly kind of accelerated, but we all still stewed in the ideas and embrace of noir or neo-noir, whatever you want to kind of call it. But because we were doing it as a team, we could all kind of depend upon each other a little more.
Justin, what was your memory of the process?
Yeah,
aside from piggybacking, of course.
Yeah, Andy hit the nail on the head. The other thing was, like we said, how detailed it was with the four of us breaking the story. So, you know, like anything else, there are times when you're feeling it and there's times when you're not, and the times that you're not are often the toughest, obviously, to get through. So when Andy and I were like, we're not feeling it today,
every day,
because there was so much work with breaking the story, we knew we could like bargain with each other. We're like, okay, we have to get to the sauna. We know, let's just go to that today. We were in the sandbox, and within that sandbox, there was room for us to be exploratory and invent and play. But because we had that sandbox, we knew these sort of benchmark moments, these sort of anchor moments we had to get to. And that really helped us when we would like sort of try to organize and chart out our day. And just the fact that I was writing with somebody like Andy, again, Andy doesn't like when people gush, so he might want to leave the room. But
that turn off.
The fact that we were such, Charlie is, other than being my like chief collaborator, he's one of my best friends. He married me and my wife. Andy became also one of my best friends. He was a groomsman, and that really helped me not be so intimidated to be writing with somebody who I think is like on the Mount Rushmore. Like I remember where I was when I first saw Seven when I was a kid. I was able to take the Seven script from my professor at UCF because he was in the academy and he let me pick a script and I picked Seven. So I don't know if it would have been way more difficult because I just would have been like, whatever you want. If we walk,
Mr. Walker, as I insist on being called. Justin, what do you think?
So it was on a lot of levels. It was unbelievably fun to write with him, and there were a couple times where like, oh my god, I'm writing something with Andy.
2 months, do you think, to write the first draft ish?
Just about.
Yeah, you guys wrote it really
That's one
fast,
of the questions you always get from any kind of aspiring screenwriter is how long does it take? Because they're wondering like how long do I cash in, man?
Right.
But 2 months, where I'm almost always absolutely 3 months. Once, no matter how much time went into the outlining, the research, how many years came before it, sit down, start writing, 90 pages or 120 pages, 3 months. So that just speaks to how we could kind of pass the ball back and forth to a certain extent.
Well, just briefly, how long would you give yourselves each day, or would you give yourselves an amount of hours or a page count to hit each day when you were writing?
We just write until we kind of petered out.
Okay.
Cursed at each other and said, I don't want to talk to you anymore today.
Your first draft was 2 months. How much of a rewrite period did you go through afterwards? And we'll talk about the nitty gritty when we get into the spoiler section, but how long until you were ready to start sending it out for funding, casting, etc.?
This was done in a very kind of non-traditional way. We're going to people at first without a script. At first it's, here's an idea that we want to go make a movie with these people involved. I remember the first conversations with our sort of early financiers was even before they read a script, it's almost ready, so we are piecing this together in a way that we know we are going to make it at a low budget. We have people involved that equal a lot of money, the amount that Andy makes to write a script, the amount that Jason, Lily, and Jesse equal in terms of value. We're making a much bigger movie than what we made. So we knew that we could get people involved or intrigued in this early on before going out and figuring out how to piece it together. So the idea of, will this movie get made, wasn't in question. This movie was getting made.
Got it.
during the writing process, which is, for Justin and I, that's very rare. We're begging people to finance stuff that we do. So that was, we sort of had a bit of control early on, which was really a nice position to be in, because we knew all of this work that these guys are doing, that they're working on the script, we're just going to go make it. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter if it's for very little money or we get $1 million, like somewhere in between. So
What was your budget and schedule?
the budget ended up being, because of COVID, was $1 million.
Wow.
But before that, it was like a $600,000 to $700,000 film.
Wow.
And the schedule was a 20-day shoot.
Wow.
So
Okay.
from the get-go, it was very contained and small, and we knew how we could do it. Justin and I had obviously done a version of it with the one I loved, so there was a model, and we took the Duplass model. The Duplasses took it from someone else. It's like there is a model if you look at it, and I always encourage first-time filmmakers, go look at that model. That is the way to get something off the ground.
And I just want to interject here, because Charlie, it's like one of the things I most admire about Charlie, Justin's wife, Teresa, who's an incredibly talented director. It is so hard to get stuff made. It's one of the reasons that I'm not a big fan of critics in general, because I think every review should be, how the fuck did you get this made? Good going. But I mean, they go and do stuff. And then, like, for me, I mean, it's a huge thing to have a movie on my IMDb page that's past 1998. So, like, I just am so admiring of their going, we're going to go do this. Not, we're going to go and try and go do this, or we're going to try and get into a development deal here. It's just like that kind of ability combined with determination allows them to actually create things. And that's just one of the realities of screenwriting. You create a lot of stuff that's just going to sit on the shelf for.
Well, and that's interesting because your plan of having it all take place in the sandbox, as you say, and you were talking about other models like the Duplass brothers. It's also a horror model, right? That's how the whole cabin in the woods kind of Evil Dead thing started as well. You get yourself a location you have access to, you figure out your story of the resources that you have available, and you do it. And that's what you guys did as well, which certainly worked too.
It's definitely an indie model, and the challenge is, of course, to make it interesting within that containment. Like Charlie said, taking problems and turning them into to your advantage, making them into solutions.
Well, and of course, if there was any shortfall in the budget, Charlie would have been able to officiate another wedding. So you had like you had that in the pocket as well.
I'm still doing it. It's a great side business.
Yeah, we don't want to get into his rate for that.
So okay, I think that we've gone as far as we can, spoiler free. So podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify, watchers of the YouTube page for Backstory Magazine, which is where all these Zoom conversations go if you want to watch us, and try and zoom in on Andy's amazing DVD library behind him. But press pause if you have not yet seen Windfall. Remember, it's probably in your pocket on your phone. Please don't watch it on your phone. Watch it on a big screen. Windfall is awesome. And come back, because we're going to get into the spoilers now. So you have been warned. So I'm just going to start with an easy one, which I kind of liked because I was tracking it as the movie's going, because I always take notes when I'm watching. And I'm realizing that, like, there are no character names here. And your official IMDb character names, Jason Segel is nobody. Lily Collins, wife. Jesse Plemons, CEO. And Omar Leyva is a gardener. So, on one level, I could see this as having been placeholder that you were later going to figure out with names. On another level, I like the kind of in the moment feeling and the true tense of not always calling people by their names, because there's times in movies where people are, they're just spelling out their whole name like every 5 minutes, like first name and last name. And it's not really the way that I have found a lot of people talk in real life. So just tell us briefly why you decided to not name your characters. And there's zero criticism here, because I actually liked it. We didn't need names here.
Speaking for myself, Andrew Kevin Walker, I I'll just say really quickly, we decided very early on there weren't going to be names. We actually called it Nobody for a while until we saw that Odenkirk had a movie called Nobody coming out.
Interesting.
I'll say that that as we batted it around and some of the stuff we watched, to kind of inspire ourselves, one of the things was, like I said, The Collector, the Terrence Stamp movie. And he says to the woman that he's kidnapped, you'd pass me on the street, I'm nobody to you. That became partly an inspiration for, but I mean, I think in a nutshell, they were named for the traditional role that not only is part of their life, but kind of what's expected from their life, what defined them in a way, at least in my mind.
Technically, the only character that has a name is April, the assistant. So, and we never see her. So,
and we never see her. That's right.
Your rules there are, she's just a hallowed voice on a phone.
Yeah, I think like Andy said, how they're perceived. The idea that Jason's character is a nobody in the eyes of other people. Wife is perceived as just a wife to the CEO. CEO wants to be perceived as a CEO. So I think that idea, and then also because we don't explore a lot of backstory in the film, and because it really explores the moments under this roof, and you learn about the characters through those moments and those interactions. I also think the idea of like hearing names, it elicits some sort of emotional reaction or attachment to a character. So the idea of hearing the name Peter over and over for one of the characters, it's like you feel like this guy Peter. Also the situation that they are kind of all distanced from each other and don't really know each other. I think all of those ideas right away felt like, okay, this works better if we never hear a name through the film.
It was a good step. And Justin and Charlie, just because obviously Andy brought up The Collector, Desperate Hours, are there any film noirs or movies that inspired you for this?
Film noir, no, but
Home Alone, right, Justin?
a little Home Alone. And also, this is more character specific than movie specific, but Jason is Nobody. I watched Dog Day a lot, sort of being in over your head in a situation that just keeps snowballing into something bigger and bigger. Which is, I know that's not technically film noir, but that was a big one for me.
The tone of Dog Day too, the balance of heist and thriller and drama and comedy. We are playing with something with this film that isn't in a traditional box where it's a comedy, it's a drama, it's a sci-fi, it's a film noir. We're sort of mixing and mashing and creating something that feels to us like real life, so.
I do have to say, Andy suggesting The Collector, I had never seen it, and it holds up. For anybody, if you've not seen The Collector, it's not, at least in my mind, it's not one that people talk about a lot, but it's worth seeing.
It's great. It's great. Okay, a second ago, you guys said that you needed to change the title when you found out there was a film called Nobody with Bob Odenkirk. Tell us about that conversation. It's always interesting to hear how people land on titles, and I think Windfall is a great title.
There was a lot of discussion. It was Nobody the entire time. I think I was the first one to see the trailer drop for the Odenkirk movie. I texted the guys and I said, I think we have a bit of a problem. And from that point on, I think production still technically used Nobody or Untitled Nobody. I think like the LLC was still Nobody, something like that. But it was through shooting, I believe, that we still didn't have a title for sure. I think like a couple days before shooting, somebody, might have been Charlie. There was a line in the script that eventually got cut once we chose the name Windfall, where Jesse's character, I think it's the orchard scene, is walking with Jason, and they're waiting now for the $500,000 to come, and he says something that you're gonna have quite the windfall or something like that. And then I don't know what the technical definition of windfall is, but there was something having to actually, I could be way off on this. I seem to recall, thinking back on it as you were asking the question, that there seems to be some sort of connection even to like something with like leaves in the trees, maybe even like oranges, and it just was like kismet. So we settled on Windfall, but it was like right before production, if I'm not mistaken.
And then you cut it out of the movie because you didn't want one of those things where, oh, that's the point in the movie where they say the title.
I forgot who said this. It might have been a friend, or it might have been a professor, or it might have been an actor that I saw in an interview, and I just am taking it as my own. But ever since I heard what I'm about to tell you, I always try to avoid the title of movies, and that is, there's somebody said that there was a long-standing gag with them and their friends that whenever the title is uttered as dialogue in a movie, they cluck really loud like a chicken in the theater. And as soon as I heard that, I said, okay, well, I'm never doing that, because now that's all I think about. I don't cluck out loud in movie theaters, obviously, but now when I hear a title, the first thing I think in my head is a clucking sound.
That's why I don't go to movies anymore. I'm not allowed, because I just caw like a chicken too much. That's funny. Yeah, there's Twitter accounts sometimes. There's YouTube videos where they do mashups of every time someone says the title in a movie. So yeah, it can be a cliche. It's also not the end of the world. But
It's
okay,
not the end of the world, but I feel like something like, when it's very specific, like I think we're all really glad that there was no line where Kate Winslet said, "Wow, this is some real Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind going on." But we want to hear James Bond, so I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 10 years old this June, and we would really love to have you check us out if you've never read us before. You could check us out at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or of course, our iPad app, Backstory. And in both places, if you've never read us, you could read our free issue as a way of test driving us and seeing what we're about. And if you like what you read, and I hope you do, we would love to have you as a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I'm offering you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. I gotta say, there is just so much to explore in Backstory, and we're building a really great issue for our 10th anniversary issue. And even in between issues, we keep adding new articles. So our Oscar issue is our current issue, and we keep adding new articles to it because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoom interviews go. So you could watch me and the guests have a chat. It would mean a lot to me to have you become subscribers to Backstory Magazine, which is my passion project. So thanks for considering. Of course, I also want to thank today's sponsors of coverfly.com and finaldraft.com. And I hope you check out their websites to show your support for them as well. Coverfly.com has years of experience of putting scripts and writers together with agents and managers to launch their careers. And some of their writers have then gone on to work with companies like Netflix, Amazon, Universal, and beyond. So of course, you got to write your script first before you go to coverfly.com, which is why I hope you check out finaldraft.com. And in their most recent software update of Final Draft 12, they added a collaborate feature so writers could write together even when they're apart in the same document at the same time. And I have a cool discount coupon code for you. If you use the code QAPOD22 in your shopping cart at finaldraft.com, that will save you 40% off a purchase of their software or an upgrade. So now is a perfect time to get motivated to write your script in Final Draft 12 and then send it over to coverfly.com. So I hope you check out their websites today. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with co-writers Justin Lader and Andrew Kevin Walker, along with director Charlie McDowell, about their latest film, Windfall. Okay, so Charlie, I want to break in for a moment here and just talk to you about production, because it's never easy to direct a film, but you were directing during a pandemic and you were using protocols that are, new, but people are getting more and more used to. Tell us about the challenges of directing Windfall in a pandemic.
It was tricky, but I think where problems lie for people is when they don't follow protocol and they sort of are just like, oh, we're making a low budget indie, so we'll just kind of go off and do our thing. And we could have done that because we were a bubbled set. No one left on the weekends. We all sort of lived together. We were shooting one location. So we could have been more relaxed on protocols than we were. But I think for us, we felt like if we were to shut down, if someone got it, then everyone would get it, because we didn't have like pods, it's like
right.
It's such a small crew. And so everyone interacts with each other. So there's there's the A zone, the B zone, the C zone. Like at some point, everyone's interacting. So we knew that if we were to go down with a COVID case, our movie would probably just fall apart. You know, like we also budgetarily didn't have a lot of money to make this movie. And so we were really strict with our COVID protocols. We were right before vaccinations. So I remember like our first AD was able to get his first dose, or he could get it scheduled, but it was on a weekend during our shoot, and he's from Arizona. So he drove to Arizona, got his first dose, and then drove back. Wow. And it was because it was like, you know, it was the time when everyone's like, we got to get the vaccine, like that'll save us all, that'll do everything, which by the way, I'm very pro-vaccine. And so we were really strict. We had a COVID officer on set every single day, and she was quite strict with the protocols. Everyone was really cautious and safe, and people very kindly didn't go home on the weekends, which would have broken the bubble, you know?
Right.
It was very much, okay, we are here to make this movie. I think at the time, everyone felt really thankful and lucky that they were working. You know, it wasn't a time where everything was just picking up quite yet. And so I think, you know, it was fun. It creates a camp-like atmosphere, you know, but it's funny because you don't see people without their masks on. So at our wrap party, which is just us on the property that we shot at hanging outside, it's like people take their mask off, and it was just like, wait, what? Like that is not how I pictured you to look, you know? And
that's interesting. And no one from your cast or crew ended up with getting COVID.
No.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Which we were really proud of. Everyone was really smart. Everyone felt safe. Everyone was just so respectful of each other. And so
that's great.
Yeah, I think afterwards all of us said like that was really amazing that we were able to, we talk about it. You know, you talk about it a lot, like, oh, let's write a movie during COVID and we can shoot it safely. But then to actually pull it off was a big deal.
Well, kudos to you on that, because that's fantastic. We're in a good place right now. As far as mysteries are being taken seriously as a genre, with Knives Out, with the 2 Kenneth Branagh, Agatha Christie movies that have come out recently, which I dug. And I think what was really important here, aside from not pegging names to people, was your use of exposition. It is a really slow drip as to what's revealed about each character and when it's revealed. And I just want to hear from you some of the challenges in that. Of course, Charlie also visually showing it as well, because just the little bits of what we learn, you know, it takes us a while to even find out that CEO is a CEO. We could assume he's a rich man. We don't know he's a startup CEO. It takes us, we know the wife is a wife, but there's more to her than just being a wife. And nobody could have a lot of different reasons for why he's doing this. But you made sure to keep your cards very close on that. So tell us about this expositional drip as a way to, with the even-keeled pace of your movie, keep the audience engaged, because it has them asking questions, which I think is a good thing for an audience. Not questions out of confusion, but wanting to know more about the story that you're telling.
I got a good idea. I'll take nobody. Andy could take CEO and Charlie could take wife. We're not all saying the same thing. For nobody, what was very important, we didn't want to tip the scales in terms of like who you're rooting for, where your allegiances are. And we thought that it's realistic, because it's conceivable that in his mind, he's going to get, even before he has to go back because the camera caught him, it's conceivable that he's just going to escape and whether however long he's on the run, as you know, prior to like a big event that happens, he's just going to be off, and this will weather and it will calm down eventually, and he'll get on with his life. So it stands to reason he would tell them as little as possible, so they know as little as possible. So it made sense narratively. And then also, you know, if he was doing this because his kid was sick or whatever, and you have somebody like Jason playing that role, it's really going to make the audience root for him. And something that we all as a collective said very early on is that we want everybody in this movie to be flawed, and we want everybody in this movie at times to be making arguments that are sound and arguments that are flawed. After a lot of conversation and thought, it became kind of the consensus that it's kind of cool that we don't know why he's doing this, and it won't tip the scale, so we're rooting for him. And also the audience could kind of project their own sort of thing onto him as to why he's doing this.
Charlie,
who did you assign Charlie?
I assigned Charlie the wife.
There you go.
Imagine that. Charlie's real wife.
Wow.
Oh, dude.
I mean, wife was the most intricate and complex in terms of knowing where she ended up, and so we spent a lot of time, and it's more interesting for actually the guys to talk about it from a scripting standpoint. For me, on the in the actual shooting of the film, my work with Lily, so much of that was tracking her character in each scene. We knew where we were going to land the plane. We knew it was a small runway, and how can we get there, and how can we earn that arc in that moment, at the very end. And so we spent a lot of time tracking through the process, and we're also shooting the film in order.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple scenes that we shot out of order because we needed to bring in a camera op that wasn't quarantined from the beginning to just do a couple days of them running through the orchard and things like that. But other than that, we're shooting the film in order, and so we're seeing the scenes sort of take a life of their own and unfold. And a lot of that with Lily is really knowing and understanding where her character is at in any particular moment. And then just to go back in terms of when you say kind of slow drip, as the director and looking at it from the very beginning, and it's not just a sort of nod to noir with the music and the titles. That opening shot is a 3-minute shot. We're sitting there and we're watching the titles of each person come up, and you're seeing this house, and you're seeing a curtain blowing in the wind, and it's very kind of slow paced, and you're trying to just like understand what it is I'm watching, and so yes, I am leaning into this sort of modern day noir version of what we're doing, but for me it's also setting the tone of the pace of this film. This sort of the digital era, the TikTok culture, the YouTube. Okay, I'm just going to get through stuff quickly and little sound bites and things like that. This film is sort of the anti that. You are sitting and living in these moments in real time. And so the idea of that first shot, and then also the shots after with Jason's character just sort of experiencing the property, that to me was really important to set the pace that we are going to sit and observe character.
Sure.
And so yes, there are going to be plot points and devices that are used, but we are also going to sit in conversation, sit in moments, sit in observation with these characters, and I'm preparing you for that now, And then what was interesting, one more thing to add, was interesting when working with the composers, when they sent me that first cue.
Amazing score, by the way.
It's incredible score. I'm so proud of what they did. I'm so proud of our collaboration on it. But that first cue, when they first sent it to me, it is that when the Windfall title comes up, there's this like absurdly big, rise and score. And when I'll never forget where I was sitting there watching on my laptop, and I started hysterically laughing because I was like, this is so absurd. I'm like, it can't be this. And then I watched it again, and I was like, oh, this is incredible, because what this does is it promises the audience in a moment that you're just sitting there and kind of watching stuff over and over. It promises the audience that the movie can take any direction. It can go anywhere. And so this like swell in sound where you're just kind of like, whoa, what was that? That is a promise for the rest of the film, or sort of foreshadowing of where the film goes, and
higher stakes than you might expect from the beginning.
Yeah, or just what you think what it is, or predict that it is, it becomes something else, and so all of those ideas we really wanted to focus on early on to set the pacing and the tone for the rest of the film.
Andy,
I've been assigned to speak today about nobody, and I feel uniquely. Oh wait, sorry. I see a CEO. I actually forgot what my assignment. So, I don't know. I mean, look, you'll see me say a lot of places. I don't even really like to analyze anything too much, because the movie's there for other people to kind of, and especially this movie, hopefully bicker over, argue over, say why this worked for them and say why this didn't work for the other person, and have the other person who it worked for convince them, blah, blah, blah. I mean, exposition and character backstory, the most important thing I think for each one of these characters, and I'm gonna step outside of my assignment slightly, for good or for ill, wife is is somewhat more defined by CEO as a wife in a way would be. Partly because I think he wouldn't have it any other way. CEO defines himself, and he's defined by magazine covers and the way that he's, the press sees him, and also what he needs to present as a business face to shareholders, et cetera, whatever, nobody's kind of a almost non-existent kind of, swept under the rug person. And so much of it is from the performance to the costumes to their interactions. Obviously, I didn't want to know too much about nobody. I certainly, like Justin said, we were very careful not to know, is he being just outright greedy and in a way, just because that's part of survival, it makes sense, or was he doing it for a higher purpose? And I mean, speaking about stakes, that's all you could hope for, is for them to kind of rise. When I draw that stupid chart during all the meetings, it rises on the page in front of you from left to right. It rises, and there's a reason for that. You're hoping that the story is rising to the moment, the characters are rising to the moment, and the stakes are rising. He goes from wanting to grab a handful of cash out of like a pickle jar and, hidden in the kitchen, to this debate over, again, we're in the spoiler section, this money that'll change his life.
But that was a hilarious conversation in which he's like, okay, 150, and then the wife and CEO are like, oh, come on, you could ask for more than that.
Yeah,
because they were assigning their own worth to the amount of money, which I was just dying at that conversation.
And I think that's one of the things that makes it somewhat unique, I hope, and also grounds it in a reality. I mean, that's the other thing that Justin and I haven't really talked about much, and we can segue to that if you want. I mean, we all wanted this to be about like a realistic kind of process, like not just like, okay, here we are, now they're all tied up. Like, we wanted to kind of have to figure things out. Like, if you want to run away from this house and leave your two hostages behind, what do you do so that they don't just call the police immediately or run to the neighbors,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. We're just trying to define it within the reality of the story.
Well, and that's why they arrived at $500,000, because that was about what he could get in a day, and anything else would be more. And he phrases it that, it's Debbie coming back into his life, which is a great way to drop exposition, because it's not talking directly about it, it's talking indirectly about it. So we know he has an affair, we know what their rift is. But I think the hat trick here, and this is what I loved about Windfall, is that, like a good film noir, nobody's innocent. So you could cast any of the three as an antagonist, regardless of what the wife does in the end, because she certainly rises to the high points of femme fatale. Even though she has her reasons, she certainly gets there. I'm just curious if you ever talked about tipping the scales more ways than one, because, in your setup of his company, it's a company that deals with redundancy to try and save a company rather than let it go bankrupt, right? So it's kind of an altruistic measure. But if you want to interpret that nobody was one of the people that was cut, we see that maybe it's not, there's no way to make that scramble without breaking some eggs. But at the same time, it's also thematic about CEO and wife's marriage, in which they left CES, kind of the CEO wasn't into it, but to come to the house to kind of reconnect. We know that their marriage is rocky, and maybe they're not going to reconnect even if nobody hadn't showed up and ruined the day. And it's kind of interesting. So I'm just curious about keeping those scales evenly tipped, because knowing that in the end, as altruistic as wife is, even after that great conversation, Justin, I'm going to ask you about this right now, that you had with them at the fire. CEO says, do whatever you can, try and handle this. It insinuates maybe her using sex to win him over, which is definitely a film noir trope, but she tries to endear herself as a person to him in the fire chat. And when nobody accuses her of basically being a gold digger, transactional, having her college debt erased, she just blows it off as, so what? I married this guy. Why wouldn't he pay for my college debt? Which is 100% sensible. So you're always evening out the scales every little step of the way, leaving the audience guessing who is going to materialize as our antagonist, as our bad guy here. And it's not until Gardner's killed that you realize, okay, there's no good way to settle this civilly. It's going to come down to something bad, and wife sees her moment. So Justin, briefly, what could you tell us about that fireside chat? Because I thought it was a great scene, and it really, as Andy was talking about people's arc rising up on a page, man, does that start wife's arc rising up.
We dubbed that scene during the process of breaking the story and scripting. We called that scene sharing and caring. That was our little code name for it. So before I get to that really quick, and this is by design, and we don't have to really get into it too much, but the one character who, in our mind, and this was always part of it, and I guess this sort of speaks to tipping the scales, that is the only purely, truly innocent person in the story is the gardener,
right?
Who gets thrown into this mess through no fault of his own. All he did was show up for work, and that's very much by design. And people could read into that however they want to read into that, but that was very much intentional. As far as the fireside chat goes, of sharing and caring, what I loved about the placement of that structurally, if we're talking about screenplays, and this again started with all four of us breaking the story, is that moment, that scene comes right after CEO tells his wife, do whatever it takes. So, and it's so amazing, again, not to overly gush, the way that Charlie shot it with Lily coming out and the shadows on her. It is complete femme fatale film noir. So you're watching this scene where she's opening up to him. And what Andy and I really loved and wanted to lead into is we were hoping that people are wondering, is this true, or is she working him based on what her husband just instructed her to do? And Lily, who I think is phenomenal, and I mean, she's just an amazing actress, phenomenal in this movie. The way that she was able to do that scene, which is basically two almost diametrically opposing things at once, which is to come across as completely genuine and sincere, where she is genuinely opening up to him, while also the audience is questioning, is everything that she's saying true? When I was watching dailies of that scene, I just wanted to hug her. She completely just captured what we were trying to write, which is she's opening herself up. She's saying something that's true, all the while her husband is in earshot. And is she doing that because she means it, or is she doing it because this guy that's listening in the next cabin over instructed her to get close to him, and that's how she's getting close to him? It's not easy to play that as an actor.
Yeah, and again, to your credit of always tipping the scales, you know, they have this argument against CEO where nobody and wife band together and say, why did you write call 911 on there? Everything was going so well. But CEO is actually not wrong, that they don't know who nobody is. And there's nothing to prove that the guy's not going to kill them. So writing that and kind of having a civil plea for help, really he gets berated for it. And although he's kind of douchey in the movie, that was the one scene where you're kind of rooting for him, like, wait a minute, what he did wasn't wrong. Of course it screws everything up, the consequence was wrong.
That was Andy's mandate, where like everybody needs to be making a good argument at times.
Okay, well, hopefully you agree with everyone almost at every moment, that everyone has, if they were to get a little more time to debate their argument, they can fight their way through it. I just want to say one last thing about,
please. I
mean, all the amazing performances, incredible. Lily had the hardest job in a way, because on the page, it really is a tipping point. Like every single one of these characters becomes revealed as more than their little expectation of their role model or their label that's been literally and figuratively placed on them. But you don't get to, in a story, reveal all that stuff at the same time. So it takes patience on the page, it takes patience on the stage. I mean, so the example I'll give is like, there's another script I wrote. It's a female lead. It's kind of a horror thing. And the
what's
female,
it called?
I'm not going to say, but the female character comes in about 25 pages in, and we're trying to cast it now. And you really have to convince people, like, I get it, you're not there for 25 pages, but let's just have a long discussion about what happens for the audience when this light comes into the movie. And the entrance and the power of that entrance is so much stronger than, you know, whatever 10 or 15 pages of exposition, whatever would have come before. So I'm just saying, it's like, it's a real tribute to that performance and the slow burn of what happens with her, because otherwise you don't earn the ending. And that's the biggest thing for me, was, did we earn the ending? 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 Go argue about it in a diner. I don't care if not everyone
you did.
You know, I want people to argue about whether we did or not.
There's no argument here, to be honest. I think you did, and we're going to get into it right now.
Clearly you're not looking online, because there's definitely an argument.
I don't need to look online.
We can have Justin read the temperature of Twitter right now.
Yeah, you don't need look like at the
No,
end
no,
of the
but
day, there'll always be a discourse online. I'm not interested in that.
of course, of course.
The truth is what you did was you gave everybody their own good arguments, which is what classical dramaturgy is about. Even the villain thinks what they're doing is justified in any good drama. Okay, so you did that here, and I know we're starting to run out of time. I want to talk about that ending because you could have had a lot of variance. One of the most beautiful things that you did in this film that someone could argue is fixated on shoes, aside from having Jason Segel, tie his shoes multiple times, it's just great the way that Lily has that speech about if she was going to get married, which also goes back to the fireside chat and looking down at her shoes, and she says it. We don't see it, she says it. And then later in the movie, when she's ready to step out of the road and possibly abandon her husband, she's looking down at her feet. And I'm like, wow, that's smart. You don't need a voiceover. You don't need a callback. We know what's going on. And especially at the end, when she is literally cutting herself out of the wire and she knows that her masquerade of wanting kids at least has been shot, which is fueling a little bit of her rage because nobody says he saw the birth control in her purse. Again, with her feet of can she go through this? And she does. She kills not only nobody, but she kills the CEO, which I thought was wild. And again, she's at that door, at that precipice of walking forward. And she does it. And I'm just curious about the variance of the endings. I was glad there wasn't a Die Hard moment where nobody, once the gun's in his hand, sits up and shoots her. Okay. It would be very film noir. Nobody would complain about it. Who's to say it doesn't happen 3 minutes after the credits are rolling? We cut out at that point. But I'm curious about, talk us through finding that ending that you found, which I really liked, and what the variants were.
There weren't many.
There wasn't anything where nobody kills them both. There wasn't anything where CEO kills nobody.
We, in one of our early discussions, that was the idea. We debated it, but it always started with that ending where she rises up, this character who is sort of sandwiched between these two men who are on opposite ends of this spectrum, but are still very sort of towering, both physically and type A character wise. And as far as variations go, no, it was always that, which Andy could speak to.
So you knew your ending, that she was going to use this as an opportunity to kill her husband.
Like Andy said, we always try to build the story, the four of us, and then Andy and I, the script, to earn that moment. And when you're going to something that big, you're tracking each time all right, CEO's journey separately. Nobody, where are we with nobody in the script? Where are we with wife in the script?
Sure.
To try to get to that ending. And the reasoning, Andy talks about like arguments that we hope people had. I would love if people had very different interpretations of when she makes that decision. When does she know she's going to do this? Is how calculated is it? Is it when she's walking down to get that money and the car lights are coming up on her face? When she turns around to go back in that house, did she know that, okay, if I have the opportunity to do this, am I going to do it? We talked about like, does she really want to kill nobody, or is nobody the means to the end, which is I have to kill nobody in order to kill my husband because then I can put the gun in his hand. There are all these different interpretations, and my at least, and I think I could speak for Andy and Charlie on this one, the biggest hope was people arguing and passionately making the case of when she decided to do this and why she decided to do this and why that order. And it's okay if people have different interpretations of it.
Right. And you could also argue, what does CEO deserve to die? Did he do something so terrible? Like, you don't talk him up as a physically abusive person. He's mentally abusive. And in the credits, her name could have easily been Babe rather than wife. I would have seen that one.
Yeah.
That's not abuse. I mean, Justin calls us Babe all the time.
Andy, the ending for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to overanalyze. It's like, for me, that was the only ending that would have worked for me. That ending was the crux of my interest in. Once we got to there and knew we were setting this high bar, I was like, okay, I could see this working and being special, because if you can get to there and earn it, that's a big deal. And it wasn't easy to kind of make sure it's earned. And there's like these guys are saying, there's plenty of people out there who think it isn't, but it's along the lines of each character having cogent arguments that they're swimming around in. And there's no like one person going, what an idiot, what's he saying or she saying? I can make a really strong argument for why it works, and I'm glad to have that conversation with the people around the table at dinner, which is where you hope movies continue to exist once you walk out of the theater.
Obviously, editing is the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about your film in the edit room? Are there any deleted scenes you want to tell us about, or anything that you shifted? It is a very sequential film. There's no flashbacks or cutting outside of there, but I'm just curious, what was something that surprised you or you found as an interesting challenge in the edit?
Yeah, this was a really interesting film to edit because, like you said, you can't move around scenes in this film. It literally doesn't make story sense. And every other film that I've done, you could find moments where you're like, oh, this actually works better if we pull it, 10 minutes earlier or whatever. With this, it is a process film, and we're sitting with these characters in these moments. And so it was actually like we had a first cut really quickly. I worked with the editor for like a month or something, and then we had a real kind of solid cut to show. But I think what was difficult at this time was I'm working with a new editor on this one, and I was never in the room with him. It was all on Zoom, and you get so close with your editor. It's like you start with this group here, like 4 people, then it goes to 50 people, and then it goes down to 2 people. And so that relationship is a really intense relationship, especially as a director who's sort of going crazy in the madness of trying to understand what it is that I've done. That person that you're spending time with is so important. And I worked with this editor, David Marks, who is wildly talented and someone that, I've become good friends with. But we didn't even know each other in person until after we edited the film, which was such a bizarre way to do it and such a pandemic way of working. We are bare bones. We are shooting what the movie is, and because we're shooting in order and we're sort of seeing how it's unfolding, then we are understanding. I'm sort of editing the film as I go along, because I can really see it in front of me. So I don't think that we left a scene out. I think all of the scenes, especially as a result of these guys' work, every scene had a purpose, whether it spoke to character, theme, or plot, and most of the time it's all 3 of them in one.
I think at one point Andy and I were writing April as a guy, and we were like, let's write her as a girl. I mean, that's literally the biggest stuff.
Yeah, and one of the pieces that moved around, I think, during the outlining more than others was just, when does wife go out to get the money?
Yes, that's true. That's true. I remember.
We moved that a couple times until we thought, oh, that has to happen here, not over here on the other side of the.
Gotcha.
It had to happen in the third act.
I know we're starting to run out of time. I want to hear what your toughest scene was for each of you. So Charlie, starting with you, your toughest scene to direct, and then Justin and Andy, your toughest scene on the page, the one you came back to again and again. Charlie.
I'm going to go back because it'll kind of bleed into this, but just when you brought up the visuals of the sort of feet, these moments at a line, for me, what started to unfold in the making of this piece was that the idea of your choices in life and whether you step forward or step backwards or stay still, all these characters are sort of making choices and they're examining these choices. Nobody says I was almost out the door and then I decided to go back in, and certainly wife at her wedding day. And so, I mean, you said it too, like, because we're dealing with their ankles being tied, then I'm shooting shots of feet. And I think at a certain point for me, the visual of moving forward or staying still became really interesting to me. And so that became a visual motif. We didn't even storyboard that part of it. That actually came in the filming. And also she has a tattoo on her foot. There's a lot of stuff weirdly with connected to feet. And then just in terms of the last shot in the end, my intention was to cut on her taking a step forward. She finally steps forward, and it was to cut on that moment. Now in hindsight, I look at that and I'm like, that is like a horrible ending and feels very film schooly to like cut on the step. It feels like overly dramatic. So when we were shooting that last shot, Lily, knowing that I'm going to cut on the step, she takes a step forward and then stops because the shot is just cutting on the step. And then I see her standing in the doorway, looking into darkness. There are now 3 dead bodies behind her. And she just stood there. I didn't yell cut. I was just like, I was sort of transfixed with the shot. And then I let it go for whatever, 5-6 seconds, and then finally yelled cut. That was the ending to me. This idea of, okay, I've made my choice. I have now taken the step forward. I've made my choice. And now what? You know, where did that take me? It took me one step forward. There's still a mess behind me, you know, and so that sort of that reflected to me the whole story in the script, you know, that everything is messy. There isn't a clear cut,
Yeah.
it has to be this or it means this, you know. Life is messy, and all the characters are flawed. So that became interesting to explore to me.
And I'm glad you talked about the tattoo, because that was another great reveal, just showing that the CEO, you know, he hated the tattoo. You're wondering, oh, what is it? You kind of forget about it. It's like, it was a rose. That's it. A beautiful little flower. This guy that has
Yeah.
this amazing garden hates it. So you're kind of like, yeah, he's definitely douchey. Justin, what was your toughest scene?
I don't know if it was the toughest scene, but it was the most important, at least for me. I don't know if Andy will agree. When we were writing it, we knew we had to get that sharing and caring fireside chat right, because it really sort of tees up the back half of the movie. It required a lot of sort of, you know, you dial up certain things. There was a lot of trial and error. Do we dial this up? Is that overplaying our hand? You have to modulate it this way, and striking that balance of how much is too much information. Are we making her too sympathetic? Might not have been the most difficult, but that was the one that we realized fairly early on was going to require the most TLC.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, I felt like we had a chunk of that written from the very beginning. And I knew as long as that chunk was there, that would work. The last scene, probably dialogue-wise and execution-wise, is the hardest, in my opinion. But overall, I mean, the hardest thing in any of this is just that initial, are we going to join arms and go together doing this and work on that outline, figuring out the whole story that has some sort of originality to it. There's no such thing as anything new under the sun, and that's both daunting and freeing to know that. It's the beating the story out, and it's great to do that together and succeed. It's horrible to do that together and not succeed. We were lucky, and especially lucky that we protected our friendships, you know, every step of the way. And like Charlie said, it went from 4 people to, you know, it extended to a whole family that was kind of the whole crew. So many people had relationships and stuff before. But I mean, that's in a nutshell for me. It's like you go into meeting after meeting after meeting, and you're going to pitch a story, a 3-act story that's going to enthrall the people that you're pitching it to. So, you know, either you're doing that for yourself to write a spec, or you're doing that to get a job. Once you've done that, it's the roadmap. I always call it a treasure map, with the end scene being the little X marks the spot. That's why I need outlines before I write. But I mean, that's the Herculean part of writing. Like, and then you go and you pitch it and you pitch it and pitch it, and then nobody wants to do it. So you go, well, let me start from scratch again with a whole story that will delight the audience and surprise. Like I say, you know, it's interesting to see how this is received, and especially the ending. But at the same time, you don't want to sell it on the ending, because you don't want to tip your hand. So I hope that people did take your spoiler warning and turn it off, because these guys know, like, it's my pet peeve. I won't even watch trailers.
He walks out, and if we're in a movie theater, he'll walk out if a trailer comes
I'm
out.
the George Costanza's father of, I want to go in fresh.
That's the thing I love about Sundance when I go there, is we don't know anything going into these movies. And I actually don't really care for trailers as much as well. I'll watch them if I'm in a theater, but like, I totally understand where you're coming from. That makes sense. You know,
I know I'm going to see the movie. I don't want to see the trailer. I've gone into Batman recently, Fury Road, so many movies where I hadn't seen a frame of it, and it's the best way to see a movie.
Yeah, I do agree with that. What's next for you guys? Justin, what's next for you?
Charlie and I are hoping to get started on something new soon. It looks like really excited. It's an idea Charlie had while on his honeymoon. I'm
based on his home movies.
I'm really looking forward to diving into that.
Cool. Andy, what's next for you?
I luckily have a couple things that'll come out, like either this year or next.
Right, you're doing another film with Fincher.
Yeah, there's a Fincher thing that people know about, and then I'm working with a friend of ours and a person I really admire, Brendan Small, who created the show Metalocalypse for Adult Swim, and they're doing a feature of that, and I'm really honored to be part of that.
Oh wow,
my favorite
that's
show.
great.
Obviously, it goes without saying, I'm honored to do anything with Fincher. That's been, you know, a delight.
Anything else you want to add, Charlie?
We're really excited to kind of dive into this new idea. And I sort of left making movies and got into TV quite a bit. And so I came back to film because I missed it and didn't love all the experiences in TV. So for me, I think we'll focus back on film and try to have one ready soon.
Well, I just do want to say, like, I really owe a debt of gratitude to these guys and Jason, who's not here, and everyone involved. But I mean, I don't get many movies made. It is like winning the lottery. To have something come out and people be able to see it is incredibly thrilling for me. So I thank you.
Andy, I've been reading your scripts over the years, even the ones that never got made, like Red and White and Black and Blue, and your other interesting screenplays. So I've enjoyed your writing for years. So look, I'm elated that you guys all made this movie together, and I hope to see more from you. I hope you all team up again.
Don't count on it.
Well,
thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. You're always a blast to talk to.
Thanks for your time today, guys. Thanks a lot. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriters Justin Lader and Andrew Kevin Walker, along with director Charlie McDowell, for being so generous with their time in discussing their latest film, Windfall. But folks, remember, Windfall is sitting right in Netflix, so I hope you go watch it on the biggest screen you own, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Of course, I want to thank today's sponsors, Coverfly.com and FinalDraft.com. Coverfly is a great way for writers and scripts to find agents and managers and start their career off right. Users of Coverfly.com have gone on to work with Netflix, Amazon, and beyond. So I hope you'll check out Coverfly.com and see all they have to offer for you. But of course, you need a script first. So I highly recommend you write it in Final Draft 12 and check out FinalDraft.com. In Final Draft 12, there's a new feature for Collaborate, which allows two writers in different places to use the same document at the same time so they feel like they're together, which is a great new feature. So look, if you've been on the fence about getting the software or upgrading your software, I have a great discount coupon code for you that will save you 40% off a purchase or an upgrade to Final Draft 12. So QAPOD22 in your shopping cart at FinalDraft.com will help you write that script in Final Draft 12 that you could then send over to Coverfly.com to help connect with industry professionals. Folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine, because we are in our 10th year coming this June. So it's been 10 years. I can't even believe it. And if you've never read us before, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And of course, you could test drive us by reading our free issue, but we have a lot of cool stuff planned for our new issue to celebrate our 10th year. And even our Oscar issue, we keep updating because we're a digital magazine and we could do that. So look, if you're interested in becoming a subscriber, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. And that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to reach out to me, and I'm always happy to hear from you, you could find me on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or as Backstory_mag, or you could find me under those same handles on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I also have a Facebook fan page somewhere, and you could even send an email if you want to write me an email to backstoryletters@gmail.com. And I go through that email as often as I can, so just don't be dismayed if I don't answer immediately. It just means I'm working on a podcast or the next issue, but I love hearing from everybody. So feel free to drop me a line anytime. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.